Section 2. Annie's bringing up is begun. Marilla finally breaks the news of her decision to Annie. It's day 1, and Marilla begins to learn what life with this delightfully open and affectionate child will be like. For reasons best known to herself, Marilla did not tell Annie that she was to stay at Green Gables until the next afternoon. During the forenoon, she kept the child busy with various tasks and watched over her with a keen eye while she did them. By noon, she had concluded that Annie was smart and obedient, willing to work and quick to learn. Her most serious shortcoming seemed to be a tendency to fall into daydreams in the middle of a task and forget all about it until such time as she was sharply recalled to earth by a reprimand or a catastrophe. When Annie had finished washing the dinner dishes, she suddenly confronted Marilla with the air and expression of one desperately determined to learn the worst. Her thin little body trembled from head to foot. Her face flushed and her eyes dilated until they were almost black. She clasped her hands tightly and said in an imploring voice, "Oh, please, Miss Cuthbert, won't you tell me if you are going to send me away or not? I have tried to be patient all the morning, but I really feel that I cannot bear not knowing any longer. It's a dreadful feeling. Please tell me." "You haven't scalded the dishcloth in clean hot water as I told you to do," said Marilla immovably. "Just go and do it before you ask any more questions, Annie." Annie went and attended to the dishcloth. Then she returned to Marilla as fastened imploring eyes of the latter's face. "Well," said Marilla, unable to find any excuse for deferring her explanation longer, "I suppose I might as well tell you. Matthew and I have decided to keep you. That is, if you will try to be a good little girl and show yourself grateful." "Why, child, whatever is the matter?" "I'm crying," said Annie in a tone of bewilderment. "I can't think why. I'm glad as glad can be. Oh, glad doesn't seem the right word at all. I was glad about the white way and the cherry blossoms, but this, oh, it's something more than glad. I'm so happy. I'll try to be so good. It will be uphill work, I expect, for Mrs. Thompson often told me I was desperately wicked. However, I'll do my very best. But can you tell me why I'm crying?" "I suppose it's because you're all excited and worked up," said Marilla disapprovingly. "Sit down on that chair and try to calm yourself. I'm afraid you both cry and laugh far too easily. Yes, you can stay here and we will try to do right by you. You must go to school, but it's not only a fortnight till vacation, so it isn't worthwhile for you to start before it opens again in September." What am I to call you?" asked Annie. "Shall I always say Miss Cuthbert? Can I call you Aunt Marilla?" "No, you'll call me just plain Marilla. I'm used to being called Miss Cuthbert, and it would make me nervous." "It sounds awfully disrespectful to just say Marilla," protested Annie. "I guess there will be nothing disrespectful in it if you are careful to speak respectfully. Everybody, young and old, in Avonlea calls me Marilla, except the minister. He says Miss Cuthbert when he thinks of it." "I would love to call you Aunt Marilla," said Annie wistfully. "I've never had an aunt or any relation at all, not even a grandmother. It would make me feel as if I really belonged to you. Can't I call you Aunt Marilla?" "No, I'm not your aunt, and I don't believe in calling people names that don't belong to them. But we could imagine you were my aunt. I couldn't, said Marilla grimly. Do you never imagine things different from what they really are? Asked Annie, wide-eyed. No. Oh, Annie drew a long breath. Oh, Miss Marilla, how much you miss? I don't believe in imagining things different from what they really are, retorted Marilla. When the Lord puts us in certain circumstances, it doesn't mean for us to imagine them way. And that reminds me. Go into the sitting room, Annie. Be sure your feet are clean and don't let any flies in, and bring me out the illustrated card that's on the mantelpiece. The Lord's Prayer is on it, and you'll devote your spare time this afternoon to learning it off by heart. There's to be no more of such praying as I heard last night. I suppose I was very awkward, said Annie apologetically. But then you see, I would never had any practice. But would you believe it? I couldn't remember one word when I woke up this morning, and I'm afraid I'll never be able to think out another one as good. Somehow things never are so good when they are thought out a second time. Have you ever noticed that? Here is something for you to notice. Here is something for you to notice, Annie. When I tell you to do a thing, I want you to obey me at once and not stand stock still and discourse about it. Just you go and do as I bid you. Annie promptly departed for the sitting room across the hall. She failed to return. After waiting 10 minutes, Marilla laid down her knitting and marched after her with a grim expression. She found Annie standing motionless before a picture hanging on the wall between the two windows, with her eye aced out with dreams. The white and green light strained through apple trees, and clustering vines outside fell over the rapt little figure with a half-unearthly radiance. Annie, when I send you after something, you are to bring it at once, and not fall into mooning and imagining before pictures. Remember that? Take that card and come right to the kitchen. Now sit down in the corner and learn that prayer off by heart. Annie set the card up against the jugful of apple blossoms she had brought in to decorate the dining table. Marilla had eyed that decoration askance, but had said nothing, propped her chin on her hand, and fell to studying it intently for several silent minutes. I like this, she announced at length. It's beautiful. I've heard it before. I heard the superintendent of the asylum Sunday school say it over once, but I didn't like it then. He had such a cracked voice, and he prayed it so mournfully. I really felt sure he thought praying was a disagreeable duty. This isn't poetry, but it makes me feel just the same way poetry does. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. That is just like a line of music. Oh, I'm so glad you thought of making me learn this, Miss Marilla. Well, learn it and hold, said Marilla shortly. Annie tipped the vase of apple blossoms near enough to bestow a soft kiss on a pink-cupped bud, and then studied diligently for some moments longer. Marilla, she demanded presently, do you think that I shall ever be a bosom friend in Avonlea? What kind of friend? A bosom friend, an intimate friend, you know, a really kindred spirit to whom I can confide my inmost soul. I've dreamt of meeting her all my life. I never really supposed I would, but so many of my loveliest dreams have come true all at once that perhaps this one will. too. Do you think it's possible? Dinah Barry lives over at Orchid Slope and she's about your age. She's a very nice little girl and perhaps she will be a playmate for you when she comes home. She is visiting her aunt over at Carmody just now. You'll have to be careful how you behave yourself, though. Mrs. Barry is a very particular woman. She won't let Dinah play with any little girl who isn't nice and good. Annie looked at Marilla through the apple blossoms, her eyes aglow with interest. What's Dinah like? Her hair isn't red, is it? Oh, I hope not. It's bad enough to have red hair myself, but I positively couldn't endure it in a bosom friend. Dinah is a very pretty little girl. She has black eyes and hair and rosy cheeks, and she is good and smart, which is better than being pretty. Annie waved the moral inconsequently aside and seized only the delightful possibilities before it. Oh, I'm so glad she's pretty, next to being beautiful oneself. And that's impossible in my case. It would be best to have a beautiful bosom friend. When I lived with Mrs. Thomas, she had a bookcase in her sitting room with glass doors. There were not any books in it. Mrs. Thomas kept her best china and her preserves there, when she had any preserves to keep. One of the doors was broken, but the other was whole. And I used to pretend that my reflection in it was another little girl who lived in it. I called her Katie Maurice, and we were very intimate. I used to talk to her by the hour, especially on Sunday, and tell her everything. Katie was the comfort and consolation of my life. We used to pretend that the bookcase was enchanted, and that if I only knew the spell, I could open the door and step right into the room where Katie Maurice lived, instead of into Mrs. Thomas's shelves of preserves and china. And then Katie Maurice would have taken me by the hand and led me out into a wonderful place, all flowers and sunshine and fairies, and we would have lived there happy forever after. When I went to live with Mrs. Hammond, it just broke my heart to leave Katie Maurice. She felt it dreadfully too. I know she did, but she was crying when she kissed me goodbye through the bookcase door. There was no bookcase at Mrs. Hammond's, but just up the river, a little way from the house, there was a long green little valley, and the loveliest echo lived there. It echoed back every word you said, even if you didn't talk a bit loud. So I imagined that it was a little girl called Violetta, and we were great friends, and I loved her almost as well as I loved Katie Maurice. Not but almost, you know. The night before I went to the asylum, I said goodbye to Violetta, and oh, her goodbye came back to me in such sad tones. I had become so attached to her that I had not the heart to imagine a bosom friend at the asylum, even if there had been any scope for imagination there. I think it's just as well there wasn't, said Marilla dryly. I don't approve of such goings-on. You seem to half believe your own imaginations. It will be well for you to have a real-life friend to put such nonsense out of your head. But don't let Mrs. Barry hear you talking about your Katie Maurices and your Violettas, or she'll think you tell stories. Oh, I won't. I could not talk of them to everybody. Their memories are too sacred for that. But I thought I would like to have you know about them. Oh, look, there's a big bee just tumbled out of an apple blossom. Just think, what a lovely place to live in an apple blossom. Fancy going to sleep in it when the wind was rocking in it. If I wasn't a human girl, I think I would like to be a bee and live among the flowers. Yesterday you wanted to be a seagull, sniffed Marilla. I think you are very fickle-minded. I told you to learn that prayer and not talk. But it seems impossible for you to stop talking if you have got anybody that will listen to you. So, go up to your room and learn it. Oh, I know it pretty clearly all now. All but just the last line. Well, never mind. Do as I tell you. Go to your room and finish learning it well. And stay there until I call you down to help me. Getty. Can I take the apple blossoms with me for company? Pleaded Annie. No, you don't want your room cluttered with up flowers. You should have left them on the tree in the first place. I did feel a little that way too, said Annie. I kind of felt I shouldn't shorten their lovely lives by picking them. I wouldn't want to be picked if I were an apple blossom, but the temptation was irresistible. What do you do when you meet with an irresistible temptation? Annie, did you hear me tell you to go to your room? Annie sighed, retreated to the east gable, and sat down in a chair by the window. Then she danced up to the little looking glass and peered into it. Her pointed freckled face and solemn grey eyes peered back at her. She bent forward, kissed her reflection affectionately, and betook herself to the open window. Dear Snow Queen, good afternoon. And good afternoon, dear birches down in the hollow. And good afternoon, dear grey house up on the hill. I wonder if Dinah is to be my bosom friend. I hope she will, and I shall love her very much. But I must never quite forget Katie Morris and Violetta. They would feel so hurt if I did, and I would hate to hurt anybody's feelings, even a little bookcase girls or a little eco girls. I must be careful to remember them and send them a kiss every day. Annie blew a couple of airy kisses from her fingertip past the cherry blossoms, and then, with her chin in her hands, drifted luxuriously out on a sea of daydreams. An extract from Annie of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Lucy Maud Montgomery, 1874 to 1942, was a Canadian writer. She wrote several books, short stories, essays, and poems. She is best known for her Annie of Green Gables series, from which this extract is taken.